Am I the only guy that when we hear one of these times Jesus is, having a conflict with the Pharisees, thank God I'm not like that. I don't do that. Am I the only guy? You know, I was thinking that. And, here, one of the times when Jesus was calling out the Pharisees, he was saying, hey, these guys, they wear clothing to show off their position and their faith. And then I look at this, and I think, really? And another time, in fact, today, he says the position of honor. Don't take the position of honor. And then I look at, well, where do I sit? Up front. It's kind of humbling, when you really think about it. But here's the thing. Jesus is always going after the Pharisees because they're such a good example of us, right? We like to think we are sponges. Once we hear something, we got it, right? Like, why does it take 40 times for Jesus trying to get these Pharisees right? Well, it took a lot more than 40 times for me, right? We think we're sponges and we hear it and we say we got it, but I think we're a lot more like a rubber band, right? Jesus stretches us, yeah, I love you, love your neighbor as I love you. Got it, Jesus. But we just shrink back to about where we were. Hopefully not as far back. And that's why he's got to come stretch us again. Today, Jesus is trying to get us to think about humility and how our humility, right? He's calling out the Pharisees, hey, don't go sit in the front, right? Go sit in the back. And then maybe you get called in the front. Now, if you read that and you think, okay, if I want to sit in the front, the deal is go sit in the back, missing the point, right? It misses the point altogether because there's still the same pride as if you go pick the place up front to begin with. No, he's saying you got to see that you're no better than anybody else. And when you do, you don't care where you sit because you're going to be surrounded by people just as good as you. And then he looks at the host and he knows the host could be kind of puffing up and saying, yeah, I get to decide who sits in the front, right? And he said, no, you don't get off either because you tend to invite people who can pay you back. And that's not what this is about, right? You go and love anyone regardless of whether they're going to love you back or not. That's not the point, right? So I got to ask, you ever think about this? Where do you stack up on this? Humility is not a yes or no, I got it, I'm not. That's not the way it is like most things. It's more or less. So where do you stack up on this scale of the world revolves around me personally, everyone else is kind of, a lower class than me, right? To this scale over here where Jesus, the Son of God, emptied himself out for us, humbled himself that much for us. So where do you stand on this scale? Now, I don't know about you, but it's easy for me to convince myself I'm over here or closer to this way than this way. But Paul gives us an idea about how to look at that maybe helps us get a little more objective about where we are on this scale. And because, the language of Paul, I struggle with, and I read it, and it's just a struggle. But he gives us two different kind of visions. That first vision is about terrible things, and you don't want to hear any more messages, right? If that's where you are, you're probably more like here. Why? Because if you're here where the world revolves around you, then you get all worried about losing what you got. Am I right? Losing prestige, losing money, losing whatever. That's where your focus is. If we think we're on the top, then we tend to have this kind of negative thing. But where do we get, when we talk about humility, right, there's kind of two things, right? One thing, let me just talk a little bit about what it's not. Humility, as I was just talking about, is not thinking everybody's below you. And humility is also not beating ourselves up to think that we're scum, right? That everybody else is better than us. That's a sort of false humility. True humility, I think, lies in looking at the people around us and recognizing that they also have gifts and skills or talents or whatever that are just as valuable as mine. But they're just different. They're just different. And when we see that, then we see them as equals, right? But we tend to not hear a lot of that because our social media, just the language of people all around us, tend to put people in boxes in classes. And some classes are lower class, right? Prisoners, the poor, the undocumented, right? They just don't belong with good people like me, right? They put them in these boxes. And long as we put people in boxes or classes, we tend to elevate ourselves because we tend to push them down. But that's not what we're called to do. We're not called to look at people as whether they're rich or poor or whatever. We're called to see people as my brother, as my sister, as an individual. And so let me give you just a couple of examples of how when you quit looking past those labels that are put on people, you see them in a different way. I had a friend who spent all of his adult life in prison, his entire adult life in prison. He comes out at 62. He has no savings whatsoever for retirement, none. No Social Security either. Why? Because he's been in jail. So he's got nothing, right? But you know what? He had a chance to start a business that would have taken care of him in his retirement years, and he passed it up. And he passed it up because he said, I want to spend the rest of I've spent all my life for me. I want to spend the rest of my life helping these men coming out of prison because I can, right? That kind of raised him up in my eyes, right? People in jail now, you think prisoners, you even hear people calling them animals and stuff like that. Well, I just heard a guy just a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago or whatever, and this guy stood up in a Colby retreat, which are like Acts retreats, but they're in prison. This guy stands up and he shares his life story. He opens himself up. He is totally vulnerable. Now, keep in mind, he is doing this. He is making himself this vulnerable in front of 40 other prisoner men in white. And prison is not a place where you want to show weakness. So you don't want to show any weakness. You don't want to show any vulnerability. However, vulnerability is a requirement of love. It's not just something that's nice to have. And so he chose to love us by being totally vulnerable and showing his weakness, showing his fears to us, right? Again, that guy is, now I think he's here. And it just keeps going on. I heard someone recently saying, oh, we're starting to have more homeless in Kingwood. And, they're going to bring more drugs and crime and all of that. Well, I got to tell you, I also have a friend who's homeless. And if you had any idea of what it takes for a homeless person to survive, much less try to get himself in a better place, let me tell you, the skills and the talents and the patience and everything it takes for him to get through the day it just embarrasses me because he's so much better than I am. You see, we got to stop looking and listening to social media and listening to people around us. I mean, we all do it. We all kind of casually don't pay attention, and we repeat what we've heard all our lives about different classes of people. And we got to start looking at the people as individuals, as one of God's loved ones. I think when we do that, then we might get this vision that the second of Paul's visions, right? Where he's talking about all the good and wonderful things. We do that. I want you to think about what the world would be like if we did that and we were treating people like that way. I think if we did, what we might discover are that we are surrounded by people. Oh, I'm sorry. We are surrounded by angels disguised as people. Amen?